21st of August 1952, at this very spot, David Nicholas and Juliet Powell Davis were married. Now that was 60 years ago, but the story that we're going to tell tonight, we need to go back a further 60 years. So our story begins in the year 1892. For on November the 25th of that year, William Morgan Davis was born. W.M., or Dickey, as he was also called, was born and raised in Pontyneath Vaughan. As this 1911 census shows, W.M. was the son of Meredith and Catherine Davis. Meredith worked at the powder works, also in Pontyneath Vaughan. W.M. was a popular, Welsh-speaking, hard-working man, although he never worked on Sundays. He was a chain smoker who seldom drank or left the village. He was also a huge animal lover. He had one elder sister called Mary Elizabeth, but she was better known as...
Well, Auntie Maisie was W.M.'s sister. She'd been a school teacher and she'd retired and she lived on her own in Pontyneath Vaughan. Very independent lady.
She married a surveyor in the colliery, but he died quite young. They were only married for 8 years. She was a school teacher. And they were married for about 8 years and he died. But he had this house built for her so that she could be near her parents. If you got married, you didn't carry on work. So when he died, she was without a job because I'm not quite sure whether she went back teaching or not. I'm not quite sure. But she died when she was 80. And she's very independent. She had a problem with that tummy. But she lived there all for the rest of her life, where the house Uncle Tom had built.
Elizabeth Bernice Williams was born and raised in Port Talbot in South Wales. She met a man called Daniel Nicholas while still living at home with her parents and when he was working at Barclays Bank.
Bernice, that's my mother, became a telephonist in the old days, working with the headphones on a thing here, and was posted to Worcester for whatever it was, the GPO in those days, General Post Office. And my father, I don't think he ever worked in Worcester, but they met somewhere around there, and that's how they came. And then she was moved to Pontardawe, which is a Welsh town just outside of Swansea, and it was around about there that they met and got married in, I don't know, 1929, just before I was born.
Bernice, as she was known, had one sibling called Avril. Their father was always known as Uncle John, and he worked at the then large nationally owned steelworks based in Port Talbot.
He was very fond of me, and it was always good company to go with him. And of course, it was a wondrous thing to wander around the docks and to go aboard these ships. And then there were little sort of steam ferries going back and forth from around the various dock sites. So it was very exciting for a youngster, especially from a rural part of mid Wales as it was then. And as I say, it had a kind of Cape Canaveral feel to it compared with the other side of the country.
In 1900, when Queen Victoria was still on the throne, Gladys Ann Powell was born at home to John and Annie Powell, who were licensees of the Butcher's Arms in Pont Walby, Gleneath. Gladys, spelt the Welsh way, was the middle of 3 daughters, Violet being the eldest and Doris the youngest. Gladys became one of the first girls to attend Neath Grammar School, but left when she was just 15 to get a job as a secretary at the gunpowder works near Pontyneath Vaughan during the war, and was a witness to a horrifying explosion that killed numerous people.
A big church woman, very faithful to her church. Liked to dress, she liked nice clothes. She was a good looking woman, up to the end,
Daniel Lewis Nicholas was born on a Pembrokeshire farm on the 5th of September 1900. He was the only son of David and Mary Nicholas, Mary coming from a line of Lewises.
My father came from Pembrokeshire, North Pembrokeshire, from just outside a village called Newport, and he was the only child. It was, we say a farm, but looking back on it, it's a small holding. I think my grandfather had about 2 cows. It was subsistence living, really. But my grandfather was called David Nicholas. They all spoke Welsh, and my grandmother. Welsh was the first language, although they could speak English.
Daniel left school at 15 and enrolled as a clerk in the then Martins Bank in Haverfordwest. The bank was later bought out by Barclays. At the start of World War I, W.M. enlisted as a sergeant with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. He was in the Somme, at a section called Mametz Wood, where much of the bloodiest fighting occurred. He also fought at Ypres. Amazingly, he was never injured in his 4 years of service. After the war had ended, he returned to Gleneath and set up his own business as a hay and corn merchant.
His father also worked in the gunpowder works in ICI, and he'd retired, so he went to help my father, Dickey, in the stores, and so worked with him for quite a long time, although he died when he was about 72, I think.
W.M. and Gladys were married on the 1st of February 1923 in the Bethlehem Green Chapel in the district of Neath. He was 30, she was 22. Gladys was 2 months pregnant. The baby, named Joan, died at birth and is buried in Pontneathbourne Chapel, but there is no gravestone. In 1929, Gladys had a miscarriage, but it turned out to be twins, and on the 1st of November 1929, Juliet Powell Davis was born. 4 years later, Gladys gave birth to her 3rd child, Tudor Mark Davis. Tudor was the younger sibling of Juliet. He was to take over the family business after the death of W.M. Later on in life, he would become an avid collector of antique weapons and also shoot for whales. At a young age, he was sent to boarding school, but on his return to Gleneath, he met Cynthia.
I used to come up here to stay with my brother, who was already married and living in Gleneath. And one night there was a party in the golf club. So I went with my brother and his wife, and Tudor was there with his friends. And he asked me to dance, and that was it. And I think we were together for about 18 months, and then we got married. And we got married in Buryport, and we moved to this house, and this is where we were, well, for 51 years. So a very happy marriage, I must say. His mother found out that he was having boxing lessons. His father was delighted, of course, but his mother wasn't very happy about it. And Tudor said, before I knew it, I was away in Llandovery. It wasn't quite the thing. But as he said, when he got to Llandovery, it was very useful, because he was never bullied. He could always look after himself.
In her married life, Gladys spent much of her time looking after the store's shop, but she was also a keen cook, especially cakes and tarts, as well as an accomplished seamstress. Gladys and W.M. were very keen tennis players. Daniel Nicholas also volunteered during the Great War, and it is thought that he lied about his age to enlist. Although the exact details remain unclear, he was badly wounded in the leg when he got tangled up in barbed wire while in the trenches.
He was part of the Army of Occupation in Germany, in the Cologne area. And of course they didn't have demob group numbers like they did in World War II. So his battalion now was shipped out, I think it was near Bonn, and they got in trains on the way back. They thought they were going home to be demobbed. And they came across the channel, and when they got to Dover, they were put into trains with blacked out windows, and they thought, this is a bit funny, you know, if we're coming home to be demobbed. And the next thing they knew, they were in Holyhead in Anglesey on a troop ship on their way to Ireland. And the Welsh Regiment were there during the worst of those troubles of 1919.
Got through most of the war without too much damage. And then he thought he was going back home to UK, but they transferred him to Ireland. And it was out there that he got hit over the head by an irate Irishman and was close to death for a while.
He was in the Curragh, that's the great prison or a prison in the Curragh in Northern Ireland. And all my life, I recall my father was a very conservative, big Tory, very conservative-minded, but from an early age he was always against the death penalty for murder in this country. He's an abolitionist. And he said one of the things that had caused him was he remembered being in, I think, Dublin Castle at the age of 19 when there were firing squads carrying out sentence on Irish rioters and terrorists who'd offended and been convicted. And I often wondered, he never said, I often wondered whether he had been in a firing squad. I don't know. I have no reasons to say he was, except for his passionate interest as a conservative against capital punishment.
After being demobbed in 1920, Daniel returned to the bank and was posted to Tregaron, which is where David and Windsor were born. After a few years, the Nicholas family were transferred again, this time to Gleneath. Daniel was an avid golfer, angler, good shot and keen supporter of Swansea Town Football Club, as well as a great motorcyclist. He was also known to place the occasional bet. At the start of World War II, he applied as aircrew, but was turned down because of his age. Instead, he became a special constable. As Captain D.L. Nicholas, he remained in the cadets for many years. Remaining with Barclays Bank his entire career, he retired at 60, at the first possible opportunity.